Okay, I'm currently in a very, very small village in the Himalayas in India in the state of Uttarakhand. It's not the Ganges down there, but it flows into the Ganges, very high up in the Ganges. And I quickly want to make this video before the sun goes down and it gets too dark to complete. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is some information, some facts about the mitochondria and some facts about the monetary system. There's a lot of monsoonal rain in India and the roads have been trashed, so it's very difficult to access some of these places. Good run. So yeah, getting here was, I got a lift from Delhi, which turned out to be a 11-hour drive due to road damage. But as usual with my videos, I want to start off with a quote. First one comes from the Bible, demonstrated very well in the Brad Pitt movie Fury, where Shia LaBeouf says, or the character Shia LaBeouf plays, says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord say, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me.'" Because the theme of this video is about the virtue of fearless. Because it doesn't matter if it's the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or Vedantic literature, one of the greatest virtues for human beings is fearlessness. So there's that quote, and then there's another one from Luke. It says, "Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." And then of course in the Vedantic literature and the Bhagavad Gita, fearlessness is the number one virtue by far. And that can be demonstrated when Arjuna, standing in his chariot, looking across the battlefield in the opposing army, and he decides he doesn't really want to fight anymore, wants to go off and meditate in a cave for 10 years. And Krishna looks at him and says, "Sorry, it's not time to go to the cave. You've got to be fearless in life. You've got to fight the battles that are put in front of you." And then, of course, there's a quote from one of my favourite movies, Lone Survivor, which the second part of the quote goes, "Brave men have fought and died, building a proud tradition and fear of reputation that I'm bound to uphold." So this rest of this video is going to be some facts about the mitochondria, facts about finance, and it's up to everybody to make their decisions based around those facts. And certainly, as I've said, none of this is advice, just me talking about my opinions while walking in the Himalayas beside, it's not the Ganges, but it drains into the top of the Ganges. Okay, so fact number one, we all have 1 quadrillion mitochondria in our bodies. They live inside our cells, not inside the nucleus, inside the cytoplasm of the cells. There's 1 quadrillion of them. Fact number two, they pass electrons, which they obtain from food and sunlight, down their inner mitochondrial membrane to produce 5 things. They produce energy as ATP, they produce heat, and that's going to be very important in our upcoming discussion. They produce light as biophotons, they produce water, which is also very important, and they produce free radicals, which have a positive effect in the body, in fact, an absolutely critical effect in the body, relating to longevity, presence or absence of degenerative disease, and eventually dying. Fact number 3, as they pass down the inner mitochondrial membrane, which is like electricity passing down a wire. Now remember, wires have, this is very important, wires have a plastic coating on them to prevent spillage of the electricity as they pass down the wires. Well, these electrons pass down the inner mitochondrial membrane using quantum physics, quantum tunneling and quantum entanglement to pass through these 5 respiratory proteins. Well, they don't pass through the 5th one. They spin it at 300 or 400 cycles per second to produce the ATP from ADP, which we use as energy currency in our body. Fact number 4 is you need optimal levels of thyroid hormone and B vitamins for that process to occur properly. Both of them help the electrons get into the mitochondria, and certainly thyroid hormone has a big role in maintaining the health of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And to help understand some of these mitochondrial facts, I've drawn a little hand-drawn diagram, very amateurish, but it shows the critical things which will help you understand some of the facts I'm talking about, which will demonstrate how the respiratory proteins and the inner mitochondrial membrane work together to produce the energy, but also determine our longevity, our risk of degenerative disease, and the fact that, here's the key thing to understand, which will be a big theme in this video, we only have a limited supply of mitochondria, because although we can make more as we get older, our ability to make more when they get damaged becomes less and less. Okay, as you can see, it's no longer evening where I am, and I'm in the foothills of the Himalayas, about half an hour drive from Rishikesh. It's no longer evening, which means I didn't get to finish the video in the evening last night. This is the river. It's not the Ganges, but it's a few kilometres downriver. It empties into the Ganges at a very high point. Coming for a swim later on. Also meant that I had to find my way home on a very dark road last night after the sun went down, which was fun. But let's keep going. I have no idea where we got up to. I think we were up to fact number 5. And that fact is, which you'll be able to use that diagram I just put on the video for you to have a look at, is that the inner mitochondrial membrane gets damaged. Now remember, we've got 1 quadrillion mitochondria in our bodies. They are delicate, electromagnetic and light sensitive communication devices in our body, completely and utterly attuned to our natural environment, not attuned to chemicals, fake light, fake EMFs.
Hi.
Hello. Say hello to everybody. And they can get damaged by a lot of things. You just have to go to the internet and search, does such and such damage the inner mitochondrial membrane, and you're going to get a surprise. Now when that inner mitochondrial membrane gets damaged, it starts to leak electrons, because the flow along that wire through the nodes by quantum physics gets blocked. It's like a pipe or an electricity flow getting blocked. And what happens is electrons start spilling out of the inner mitochondrial membrane, and they just happen to spill out cytochrome 1. Have a look at that diagram, because that's at the start where the blockages build up. Later on in the membrane, the electrons spill out at cytochrome 1, which form free radicals, and so happens that the mitochondrial DNA is right near where cytochrome 1 is, so those electrons spilling out start to damage the DNA of the mitochondria. So those free radicals spilling out of cytochrome 1 communicate with the mitochondrial DNA that there's a problem with the electron flow through the respiratory proteins. Now the mitochondria's got 3 options. 1, the mitochondria commit suicide because it's too damaged to repair. That's called mitophagy. 2, the nucleus sends signals to start producing more respiratory proteins which are working properly in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Or 3, the mitochondria starts to do something called uncoupling. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. So uncoupling is where the electrons are used to make heat rather than ATP. Now that allowed warm-blooded mammals to form, and also relieves the blockage of the flow of the electrons in the mitochondrial membrane, because those electrons don't pass through the respiratory proteins, they go in other directions to produce heat. It's a bit like taking the chain off the reels of the bike. So you're sitting on the bike, pedaling like crazy, getting hot, but getting nowhere because you're not actually moving the wheels. So uncoupling is separating the electron flow from the inner mitochondrial membrane to produce heat rather than energy. Now here's the really interesting thing, which is fitting that I'm standing next to a cold river, is that cold thermogenesis and fasting / intermittent fasting also produce uncoupling. So if you want to start relieving the damage and the blockage in the inner mitochondrial membrane, I kind of think of it as rugby balls being passed along a rugby backline. You know, if you start throwing too many balls too fast down the backline, there's going to be problems that people are going to start dropping the balls. So if you want to relieve that, you stop throwing the balls down through the backline, and they use the electrons to produce heat, which allows the inner mitochondrial membrane to repair itself while you're producing heat. And that process happens automatically or can be stimulated by getting in cold water, because you better start making heat when you're in cold water, or fasting and intermittent fasting. Fact number 9 is that coenzyme Q10, as you can see in the diagram I drew, helps shuttle electrons from respiratory complexes 1 and 2 to respiratory complex 3. NAD/NADH moves them into respiratory complex 1, but it's coenzyme Q10 which helps them move from 1 to complex 2 and 3. And if the electrons are moving smoothly, there's going to be less spillage at cytochrome 1 because the electrons are being shuttled along smoothly by coenzyme Q10. Now the more spillage, here's the really critical thing, the more spillage of electrons, fact number, what are we up to? I think it's fact number 10. The more spillage at cytochrome 1, the more free radicals there are. Now remember, those free radicals are useful because they tell the mitochondrial DNA and eventually the cell DNA that there's a problem which needs to be adjusted. But if that problem can't be fixed, then that causes inflammation, and it causes accelerated aging, causes early onset of degenerative disease, and ultimately it puts paid to our attempts at longevity by causing an earlier death. That's how important electron spillage at cytochrome 1 of your 1 quadrillion mitochondria are. So I make these videos. That's how important it is, because that's the root cause. Fact number 11, there's a fixed and diminishing supply of our mitochondria. Yes, we can make more. That's called mitogenesis. When we get a signal from the mitochondria that they're sick and damaged and have to be replaced, they commit suicide, mitophagy, and then they start mitogenesis, which is where more mitochondria are created. The problem is that our ability to do that as we get older gets less and less. That's the diminishing supply. So yes, we can make more, but our ability to do that as we get older gets less and less, which is why you find as we get older, unless you're working hard on it, your energy levels are going to go down, as are the mass of your organs. Muscle mass, brain mass, heart function are all going to decline because of that reason. So just remember, mitochondria have a fixed and diminishing supply. Fact number 12, mitochondria can sense light as well as produce light as biophotons, and sense electromagnetic frequencies as well as produce their own electromagnetic frequencies. That's why we know that mitochondria contain ferrous oxide, which is what birds have in their beaks to help them navigate along electromagnetic frequency lines. That's also one of the reasons why I feel a lot better in mountainous areas where I'm at increased elevation. Because at increased elevation, there's a lot less light pollution and there's a lot less electromagnetic frequency pollution. So my one quadrillion mitochondria are much better at communicating with the universe. You can use any word you like for universe. I'm using it loosely because you have to put what you believe those 1 quadrillion mitochondria are communicating what or who I'm communicating with. And to me, it doesn't really matter what name we use. But you're going to see me making more and more videos from mountainous areas at increased elevation, because there's no doubt at all, after having just hiked the Mont Blanc Massif in France, Switzerland, Italy, there's no doubt that that's where I feel physically and mentally much better and much more in tune with my environment. And in connection, whatever we think designed this place. Part 2. This is where we look at the corollary of the diminishing and fixed supply of mitochondria with the world of finance, where hard money is defined as money which is hard to produce. Soft money, easy to produce. Pretty easy to produce more paper money by printing. Very hard to produce more gold. There's only a finite supply of gold on the planet, only a finite supply of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which we'll talk about as well. And that gold, interestingly, came from space, came from the universe. It's stardust. You can interpret that how you like as well. But gold was stardust, which came to Earth apparently, was used to form the Earth. And that gold is hard money because it's very hard to produce. There's only a limited supply. And the more that we get, the harder the rest becomes to get. Because one interesting thing is aluminium, which is incredibly cheap now, a few 150 years ago was much more expensive than gold, because it was incredibly difficult to extract aluminium from the earth. Then, kind of overnight, technology improved and it became very easy to extract aluminium and the price plummeted. The new technology made it much easier to source aluminium, whereas gold, which remember is indestructible, can sit at the bottom of the ocean for 200 years and not change, is very resistant to debasement. Hard money is resistant to debasement. Gold and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are also decentralized. Centralized governments can't decide to make more Bitcoin. Centralized governments can't decide to make more gold. So gold, Bitcoin, a few other cryptocurrencies are resistant to debasement and decentralized. Fact number 15, according to the World Gold Council, gold supply has increased by 1.7% every year, and that's hardly changed over time. That's how much more gold becomes available every year. The amount increases by 1.7%. Bitcoin, sure, more is made every year, but it's a very small amount, and it gets less and less over time, as with other cryptocurrencies. And interestingly too, nobody knows who made Bitcoin. Well, we think we don't know who made Bitcoin. And it's also decentralized. Nobody can change how much Bitcoin is made every year. Hello? Right, I'm about to walk through town, so I might get a little noisier. Good afternoon, namaste. Next point is that I was recently in London and Paris after doing the Mont Blanc climb, and I was watching an interview with British diplomat Alistair Crook, and he was saying how the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are moving more and more to the hard money of gold, and how that Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China, and China is becoming increasingly dependent, on Russia, because Russia is now selling its gas supplies of Russia and Siberia to China. So China has solved its problem of cheap energy, and Russia's solved some of its financial problems. What is a problem is that gas, and this is none of my opinion, I'm just reporting on what Alistair Crook said because I don't know anything about finance, but China's solved its energy problem, Russia's solved its finance problem. India is also moving in that direction, as is Saudi Arabia, who have now set up gold exchanges with the Shanghai Gold Index. Somebody going for the shop for a snack. So, but what's the problem? The problem is that cheap gas supply, that cheap energy, was meant to go to Europe. So Europe now finds it as a massive problem with energy supply. And I was recently in London and Paris, which is kind of funny because I'm now in the Himalayan mountains, about to do 1 month intense yoga training, and I'm like, after climbing a mountain for 2 weeks, up and down, it's like an ironbark tree in flexibility. So I got a lot of catching up to do on my yoga. But yeah, in London and Paris, I was there for both sets of demonstrations. Both sets of protests were about immigration and the economy. And I can tell you, there's some big problems coming. You can feel it in those cities, the discontent. And now you've got Russia and China solving their problems, India moving more and more towards their direction because of the disrespect they feel, Saudi Arabia doing increased work with the Shanghai Gold Index. They honk to let people know they're coming around these curly mountain roads. Not because I'm in their way. None of those countries, the BRICS countries or the increasing number of countries which are trying to join them, want anything to do with soft money anymore that another country just keeps printing to devalue the dollar. You're getting paid in something which keeps getting, on a daily basis, less and less valuable. They want to move to hard money, fixed, diminishing supply, which is indestructible and decentralized. Might see a lot of monkeys along here. It's a whole lot when I walked down this morning. Other thing is that Russia and China are now cooperating on massive technology projects as well. Let's summarize some of the similarities. Mitochondria, gold, Bitcoin, a few other cryptocurrencies. What do they have in common? They have a fixed supply and a diminishing supply. Mitochondria, because as we get older, we become less and less able to repair the damage from the free radical leakage, and because gold becomes increasingly difficult to get out of the ground, and because Bitcoin and a few other cryptocurrencies, which are software basically, have embedded in the software the fact that nobody can change that software and they can't increase the supply. So my opinion only, not for anybody else. I don't give opinions. I just try and live by example. My opinion is that we are fast approaching a time in history where we are going to have to be fearless. So, look after your mitochondria. They keep you alive. They keep you healthy. They keep you fit. They make you live a long time. They help you communicate with the environment around you. They get destroyed by toxins, bad foods, bad light in our environment. Look after your gold. Look after your Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I'm making sure that they are hard money, fixed and diminishing supply, hard to produce. And as Gandalf says in Fellowship of the Ring, when he gave the ring to Bilbo Baggins, he said, keep it safe, keep it secret. And as usual, to finish my video, always remember the quote, no matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how far you fall, you are never out of the fight. Don't give up. And another one I'd like to add to all my videos going forward is the one I've talked about occasionally, but I have to remind myself of this constantly. It's kind of a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which is, grace comes from being grace worthy, but grace comes. So that's it from me. Because I'm in India, it's namaste, which means, as we all know, the divine in me sees the divine in you, and I don't know if there's a better greeting or goodbye in the history of the planet than namaste. So, namaste from me. Gotta go do some stretching, gotta go have a swim in the cold water, get some uncoupling going on. Peace and love, namaste, bye. And remember that after nearly 6 years I remain suspended in nutritional environmental medicine and can only work as an emergency specialist in a public hospital. So none of this is health or medical advice, and certainly does not replace a professional relationship with your own healthcare provider. And just because I go jumping in freezing cold water doesn't mean anybody else should without adequate training in the hormetic principles of contrast therapy.